Pill. Orange Pill. Orange Pill.
It isn't red, it isn't blue, but these two guys are the same to me and you. Right. I'm going to show you something on screen. And this is really an important element of the show. It's the theme of our show. And it's how are we not talking about how you deep fucking value is just the Robinhood CEO with a headband on. Now, that's what I thought, right? Like, you look at that.
Yeah.
This is part of the simulation. This is a simulation. We know it. That's why I wore my cat eyes staring at you. Those my sweatpants.
Yeah. The simulation's breaking down. In Star Trek, when the phasers, not the phasers, but the transporter room, they were beaming Scotty and Dr. Spock and Captain Kirk around from planet to planet. Sometimes the machinery would break down and, they couldn't quite get it. And, this is what's going on here. The simulation was supposed to beam two different versions of androids into these different roles. The beams were crossed and the simulation put the same guy into two different roles. Really, it's very obvious here. Same character is playing both roles of Robinhood CEO and Deep Fucking Crazy Man. What's his name? Deep Fucker?
Again, like, what is his name, right? Like, I've seen him presented in Washington Post, New York Times as Deep Fucking Value or Roaring Kitty. So he's one of those two, but he's also the CEO of Robinhood. And I think this is like, the fact that they thought they could pull this on us is almost like all the stories that we cover for the past 20 years, nearly 20 years, Max, is that they think they could pull these tricks over on us because they think we're not paying attention. They think we don't notice that, the bailout, that we're going to rescue the financial system in 2008, 2009. They act like we didn't notice that they didn't rescue anybody but some bankers, right?
Wait, Deep Fucking Value and Roaring Kitty are two different people?
I'm not sure. That's the thing about being in a simulation.
Or I should say they aren't two different people?
Well, like if you've ever played a video game beyond Pong, since Pong, the days of Pong, Max, they have characters in these games.
What about Pac-Man? You got Pinky and Winky and Dinky, I believe.
Right.
And voila, you've got Deep Fucking Values doing a Pac-Man on GameStop over the counter, market. And meanwhile, the hedge funds, Melvin Capital is owned by another one, Pinky, which is Citadel Capital, which is owned by Blinky, which is the Federal Reserve Bank, which is owned by Stinky, which is Janet Yellen over the Federal Reserve, which is owned by Fatty, which is Karsten's at the Bank of International Settlements in Europe somewhere, I believe it's Switzerland. So you've got this huge video game. It's breaking down in real time. The simulation is getting all fuzzy. Captain Kirk pops up in the game. He's still alive, actually, and he's doing some kind of NFTs on some weird blockchain over in planet Zubla. And then where's Spock? I'm sure he's in the game. Let's send down the transporter room and head over to the Deep Fucking Value so that they can get totally deep fucking fucked over by Melvin Capital, which is owned by some Sharpies on Wall Street anyway.
Right. So I want to, continue on with this simulation because, of course, a simulation is like a multi-layer, many-layered, many-player games. How do you call that? Multiplayer games?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mass play, multi-layer, multiplayer, mass multiplayer clusterfuck.
Yeah, we're talking
Twister
like
in cyberspace with no olive oil.
Well, it started in our generation, right? Because I want to talk about the zombie and the relevance to this, because zombies are the biggest in the whole gaming world. Of course, the evolution of the zombie archetype, according to Wikipedia, came with the video games Resident Evil and the House of the Dead in the late 90s. They followed on during our generation. We had the Night of the Living Dead, which was first came out in 1968. This was the based on Richard Matheson's novel, I Am Legend. So why I bring up zombies is because if we're in a simulation, it makes sense that these two actors, this one actor playing these two roles in this game is, here we have this Robin Hood guy, and he's representative of this Wall Street elite situation of Citadel and these hedge funds and stuff. And what hedge funds have done to what used to be a real economy in America is they hollowed it out. They turned it into a zombie economy. We have zombie banks. We have zombie companies. It's something like 40 or 50% of the companies on the S&P 500 can't even meet the interest on their current debt.
Right. They're called zombie companies.
Yes, they're literally zombie companies. Private equity hollows out companies. They extract all the lifeblood of the company and fill it with debt. Now, what these kids did, represented by the same guy playing another actor in this game, is they revived a dead company, GameStop, right? It's a dead company walking, right?
Yep.
Because it's like out of the past, of this blockbuster distant past in the world that Max and I grew up in, when things used to happen in the real world, real retail space. And it was a dead company, but it was being naked shorted, which is a process of zombification.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, and that's really important in the origins. As I said, there's an evolution of what zombies represent. But the origin in Haiti was that you had a bokor, right? The person who zombified somebody. There was always an individual who zombified you, or zombified your neighbor, or zombified your children. And here, these are the bokors in this situation were these hedge funds, the private equity, the financial system, the central banks. They were the bokors that turned this economy into a zombie economy.
Like naked short selling is like the voodoo spell that they apply to create the zombification of the economy and of these various companies.
It's like the liquid they give you, the potion they give you that turns you into a zombie. And that was one of the things that was actually when the United States ruled Haiti for like a decade or two, they actually introduced into law that you couldn't turn somebody into a zombie, right?
Right. They should apply that to Wall Street, What about your own backyard, huh? You're turning all these companies into zombies. Just forget about Haiti for now. And talk about, Janet Yellen, she's been zombified. Bernanke, he's been zombified. Jamie Dimon, he's a zombie. What about our own backyard and the zombies? That's the problem we got to take care of right now. And I'm not talking about the cranberries either. Like a zombie, oh zombie, get out, da-da-da.
And there's the Wikipedia on it goes into the storyline of films, the classic tropes of a zombie film.
Right.
Are that, a zombie appears because they've been zombified by a bokor, and somebody like Max and Stacy encounter the zombie and say, "Oh my God, there's a zombie." And they go to the authorities and say, "There's zombies here." And the authorities always say, "Nothing to look at. Don't worry. Don't worry." And by the time by the time the authorities start to take it seriously, it's too late. So that's what we have in this economy right now. It's too late to do anything about it. They're trying negative interest rates. They're trying MMT, UBI, all this free money. They're trying money printer go brrr. They're trying to do anything to...
yeah, I like the way to put that. That the zombie invasion of the zombies, they're trying MMT, UBI, quantitative easing, negative interest rates. Like they're trying all these weapons against the zombification of the economy. None of these weapons seems to work. And the bokor is infecting more of the economy, is becoming zombified. And naked short selling, I read that naked short selling was officially made illegal in 2008, right? Up until then, it was unofficially illegal. It was part of the guidelines that were part of the rules and regs of Wall Street, that naked shorting or counterfeiting sales to manipulate a stock price was shunned. Then in 2008, it was officially made illegal. And then in 2021, it was spectacularly made public that these funds were engaged in this massive fraud to zombify all these different companies for personal gain to feed their zombie empires.
Right. So we have zombies all around us, a zombified economy, a zombified culture, a zombified political system, structural system. The institutions are all zombies. So when these kids, what do you do in a movie? What do you do in a game when zombies are coming after you? You hit them back with other zombies, right? Only a zombie can kill a zombie. So they're both zombies. They're both the undead. They're both without souls. So here they revive GameStop. Then they tried Silver Squeeze, which is a zombie money, right?
Silver is a zombie money.
It used to be a money.
It's been demonetized or zombified.
That for thousands of years, it was a monetary metal. They tried to revive that. It's no longer has its soul, because that's important in the term zombie. It actually originally came from Central Africa. There's still a word there that sounds like zombie, which is like, it's a dead person without a soul. There is a dead person with a soul, but there's a dead person without a soul.
And, silver used to kill zombies. It used to kill vampires.
Exactly.
It used to be a silver bullet by the Lone Ranger. It used to go after the bad guys. Silver was a great elixir. Silver was an antibacterial.
Yes.
It killed vampires and zombies, but now it's been zombified because the Bocor targeted it with naked short sales. Naked short sales, as we've been documenting for nearly 18 years, killed the silver price discovery, turned it into a zombie metal. Gold, similarly, is mostly a zombie metal. It's been demonetized. As Michael Saylor refers to gold now as dead money. What's he saying there? It's zombie money. All these short sales that are being attacked with naked short sales, these small companies that are still struggling to not go completely bankrupt, complete zombies. Who's running the country? 85-year-old, 90-year-old zombies, the walking dead, stumbling into press conferences, pooping themselves like Jerry Nadler. He's obviously been zombified.
Right. And again, this zombie game, I need my margarita for the next sentence, because this zombie game. Now, one thing about zombies, and they've studied this, how they happened in Haiti, is there's this belief that there were these sort of guys who gave toxic, from mushrooms and stuff like that, fungus that would turn people into essentially a walking dead,
right? That
they weren't able to control themselves. There was another notion presented in the 60s or 70s by a sociologist in the UK who was saying that because he went to observe it, and what they found was that there would just be like essentially schizophrenic people on the streets of Haiti, and somebody who had lost a loved one in a traumatic event decades ago would be convinced that this was the person. And so everybody around them believed it, and they believed that this person who was just a schizophrenic or catatonic or somebody, a mentally ill person on the street was the loved one. So that was all about belief, whether or not this person is like these are the same people, right? Are they zombies or what? Like, what is this about?
Right.
And I'm saying it's a game because, there are funguses or bacteria, things like that could turn people into a zombie. What do cats have? But they give humans toxoplasmosis. So they give us this brain disease, right? This control our minds. They're playing this game on us where they're, obviously they run the internet. So this whole thing, Wall Street Bets, it's probably just a cat fantasy. To cats, all humans probably look alike. They probably don't know that to humans, actually, this is the same human.
Well, let's go down to toxoplasmosis for a second and talk about this, because people on Wall Street, we know also this is documented. You can look it up. The bankers and brokers purposefully eat cat poop to get toxoplasmosis, to devoid themselves of all empathy in the hope of better performance. So this Robinhood CEO has probably poisoned himself with toxoplasmosis by overdosing on cat poop. And he schizophrenically is deep fucking shit. The other guy.
Deep fucking value.
Roaring Kitty. Deep fucking value Roaring Kitty. It is the guy dressed up unknowingly to that guy, because his cat poop habit of toxoplasmosis has overcome, and now he's schizophrenically driving the entire American economy they need to have hearings. So when they have the hearings in Washington, and they're going to have a Senate committee, and they're going to get Roaring Kitty, and we're going to get the CEO of Robinhood. They won't be able to appear simultaneously because they are the same person due to the cat poop they've been eating for the last 5 years.
Right. And it's like I'm saying is everywhere you look, if you think that, if you understand this as a simulation, which is a game, you know, it makes sense that we're in a zombie game because everything around us is zombies.
Is that why you're wearing your kitty cat eye pants?
Yes. Yes. These are my kitty cat eyes,
Yeah,
my
now
cat
you know.
eyes.
These little kitty cat eyes, they glow in the dark. And I'm the first one that noticed that they were kitty cat eyes. Stacy
No, you
didn't
notice.
actually know that was the design.
Well,
and then one night I look up and I see glowing kitty cat eyes, a dozen of them staring at me in the darkness, and I freak the fuck out. Now it turns out that they glow in the dark kitty cat, you know, what do you call these? Culottes?
They're sweatpants. They're sweatpants. What era are you from? Max is a zombie from the 18th century.
I gotta wear my culottes. I mean, that's a word definitely from the 70s. I don't think anyone's mentioned the word culottes in 40 years.
The very first time that the word zombie was ever recorded in the English language was in 1819 in a history of Brazil by the poet Robert Southey in the form of zombie, Z-O-M-B-I. The Oxford English Dictionary gives the word's origin as West African and compares it to the Congo's word Nzambi, God, and Zumbi, Nzumbi, fetish. I'm just saying, like, when I saw these two guys who were presented as two different guys, but obviously the same guy, then I realized, well, who presented this? Like, that we would, who would write this script, right? Well, it has to be a cat because a cat can't determine, like, all humans look alike to the cat, right? They can't tell the difference between it because there's not going to be another human that wrote this script because they would see that it's the same guy playing the actor.
Right, Roaring Kitty. That's another clue.
Roaring Kitty, that's the other clue. So the cat's always just sitting there watching us and think we all look alike, and they're cheap. They didn't want to hire two actors.
So behind the hologram, that is our reality, is the cat, and that's why cats rule the internet and cat memes rule the internet. They are inserting themselves into the hologram. And so they decided to play with us by writing a script for the hologram of having the CEO of Robinhood be Roaring Kitty, actually the same person who was going to get caught up in a massive naked short selling scandal and wrongly blamed on eating cat poop on this show.
Exactly.
But it turns out that it was just a kitty programming the hologram in a way that was trolling us humans.
So that's the explanation. That's why you tune into Orange Pill Podcast. This is why swanbitcoin.com/Orange Pill finances this show. They sponsor the show because they like the deep insight that we offer.
Swans don't reprogram the hologram of humans. Only kitty cats do. That's why he stacks sats at Swan and not at kittycat.net/cat poop. Only go to Swan to stack your sats at swanbitcoin.com/orange pill.
That's the only way to fight these zombies anymore because everything else is a zombie economy, a zombie institutions, zombie financial system, zombie stock markets, zombie leaders, political leaders, and zombie monies like gold and silver. And we saw a 14% outflow of gold demand last year. I saw you tweet that. I think I have it here somewhere. Yeah,
gold is puking.
It's
Peter
becoming
Schiff
a zombie.
is puking every day now. He's down at the bowl. He's at the driving the porcelain bus every day. Peter Schiff. Bleh, bleh. Gold is sinking as all that capital is moving into Bitcoin now. And he's like, no, stop it. I don't like this simulation. I want out. I want something real. I want to go back to the 1800s. I want my gold.
So what we're trying to tell you, and hopefully the kitty cat doesn't hear this.
Yeah, don't tell the kitty cat.
Don't tell the kitty cats. So what we're trying to tell you is that the way out is Bitcoin, because the kitty cats don't know about Bitcoin. They can't control it yet. That's why they're trying to like mess with Elon's mind, saying, oh, go to the dog, Elon, stay away from the Bitcoin, that might hurt us, right? So that's the trick. You got to start stacking sats because that's the only way out. And you got to stay tuned for this interview with Dan Held, because this is a way out of this game that we're in, the simulation.
It's the escape route, as Christine Lagarde would say, the escape route. Dan Held is the He's the
Lights the path for
he's
you.
he's the guide on the path,
The spirit guide.
the spirit guide away from the kitty cat infestation and the hologram running parallel to this reality. Dan Held's your man. Take it away, Dan.
All right, Max, it is time now to go to
Dan Held, he's the growth lead at Kraken, publishes his own newsletter called The Held Report. You can find it at danheld.substack.com. We, of course, have known Dan Held for many years. He's active all over social media with tweets that are philosophical, they're inspiring, they are maximalist. So whenever I see him, I'm reinvigorated.
right. Dan, welcome to Orange Pill Podcast.
Well, thanks, y'all. I'm wearing my orange shirt today on the Orange Pill Podcast. I got to represent, and I appreciate the kind words. It's Bitcoin has been an obsession of mine for 8 years, and it's it's funny. I keep rediscovering new things about it, or having like another level of depth of knowledge, and I kind of feel a responsibility to share that with everyone else. And that's why I started posting content.
Yeah, let me ask a follow up to that right away, because a lot of us get into it and we get into the rabbit hole and we're like, oh, that's amazing. Oh, wow. And then we're like, wait a minute, there's another layer here. Oh, wait, there's another layer. You've been digging for 8 years. You're saying you're still finding new layers to the protocol. And what is there an end to it? Or some of us get to the point where we think this is really a 1 in 1,000 year event, something that's beyond just any comparison. And I mean, how far is this going to go, but still keeping your feet on the ground, Dan? Like, where's this going?
Great question. I think this isn't just 1 in 1,000 years. This is 1 in a human existence sort of event. This is like the invention of fire or the wheel or these other huge technological advancements. I mean, Bitcoin isn't just technological, though. That's what's so wild about it. A lot of people just go, oh, it's the code, it's the tech. It's the code that works with humans in the real world and incentivizes them in a really unique way to ensure Bitcoin's survival and that it thrives. And that's where I think some of this is so fascinating to see how Bitcoin has been developed. It isn't just this cold, stale code. Again, it interacts with the real world. And Satoshi wasn't just an engineer. He was a polymath. He understood how humans would behave, how humans respond to FOMO, how that in turn, that FOMO makes Bitcoin's network adoption, makes everyone adopt Bitcoin at a faster rate, which increases the security model, which protects Bitcoin. It's this incredibly intricate, woven together, different expertise that Satoshi wove together to build Bitcoin, that every time I go pick it apart or examine it, I just walk away and I'm like, wow, that was an incredibly brilliant, and just there's so much nuance to it. It's beautiful.
I love the way you describe Satoshi as a polymath, because, we talk about Renaissance 2.0, that this is the period of time that we're in now, brought about by Bitcoin. But in terms of that protocol, I want to talk about your Bitcoin super cycle, but in particular, the narrative of Bitcoin within these super cycles, because I feel kind of like for the past, Max and I got involved in 2011, but this whole time, the shifting narratives of Bitcoin has always really been about us, the participants in Bitcoin, because we keep on staring at Bitcoin, and it's like we're playing a game of charades, or as they say in Britain, charades. And what it is like it keeps on trying to tell us what it is, and we keep on getting it wrong. First, it was like, hey, this is going to compete with PayPal. And that's all the early companies like BitPay. That was one of the very first companies in the space, and it was going to be the PayPal for Bitcoin, right? Now PayPal, of course, is coming to Bitcoin rather than the other way around. But what we are now on, what we've settled on is Bitcoin is gold 2.0. So that's the market most participants are now looking at it as. Do you think that's true? Or where do you think it's going? Like, what are we going to be, as we're all staring collectively at Bitcoin, what are we going to see next?
Great question. And certainly over time, depending on when people got in, you might have heard that, Bitcoin's going to beat PayPal. You might have heard of the blockchain, not Bitcoin narratives. You might have heard of the ICO and Ethereum narratives. narratives in crypto ebb and flow very quickly as people rush in to take advantage of that narrative and how it works with protocols. It's sort of like narrative market fit for the protocol. Is a narrative around why the protocol is valuable actually why it's valuable? And I think Gold 2.0 has been the constant, persistent narrative for Bitcoin, even though there were other competing, even more popular narratives like the payments one back in 2013, 2014. Gold 2.0 was persistent since day one. So there's the persistence of that narrative since the beginning, not necessarily the popularity of it, but the persistence of it. And now I think with COVID, the whole world has a new lens in which to examine Bitcoin, and now they fully understand why it's valuable. It's really hard to sell someone earthquake insurance unless an earthquake happens. It's really hard to sell someone on a lifeboat unless there's an emergency. And Bitcoin represents this antidote to poor central banking policy, and that doesn't come into focus very often. It's not like people are walking on the street going, "Oh, I wonder what my central bank is doing." It's like during moments of 2008 financial crisis, it's during COVID. Those are the moments when people start to question the reality. And that's when its narrative of Gold 2.0 and its value of Gold 2.0 comes into focus.
Right. Well, having said that, I was listening to the MicroStrategy call this week, the conference they were doing. Michael Saylor, of course, getting huge into Bitcoin, and then he opened up the books to other CEOs to copy what he's done in terms of transforming the treasury over to Bitcoin. He talks about fiat money as a wasting asset and losing 20% a year of its energy, et cetera. But then the keynote speaker from NYDIG, and I'm blanking on the name.
Steve Ross?
Yeah.
Ross Stevens.
Ross Stevens.
Yeah.
Right.
Ross
So
Stevens,
I'm sorry, Ross, but I'm doing this on the fly. I mean, he gave an absolute brilliant keynote speech, and he said he made the case to Michael Saylor, and Michael Saylor was jaws dropped. He made the case that basically not only is Bitcoin better than gold, at least equal, but better than gold, but it's actually better than fiat, because as we know, fiat is debt. And when you use fiat with something like a credit card and you're out there and using it to buy a cup of coffee, that debt doesn't settle. That trade really doesn't settle for several days. I mean, you have the transaction, sure, but it doesn't settle. And you have counterparty risk. It takes 2 or 3 days to settle finally. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's been confirmed, settled and confirmed within an hour. So in that regard, it's actually better than fiat. So, we were told one of these counter narratives that, we need fast transactions. We're going to fork Bitcoin. It's going to be, we need to have more and more transactions per second. Well, no, that's wrong also. So this is yet another piece of the pie. I mean, it's just continuing to, like a lotus, unfold its petals. And we are continuously struck by what we find in there. But on getting back to your super cycle, basically, I guess we can talk about that in terms of the halvings, right? There's been 3 halvings going back to 2012, every 4 years. And it seems to correspond with a super cycle, which also corresponds with a bit of we had 3 major crashes, Dan. Let's call it what it is. Are we at a point, are we moved beyond the huge gains and crash cycle? Where are your thoughts? Because you seem to really have a good appreciation for this side of things.
So first of all, no one can predict the future. So this is us kind of waxing philosophically about it, just for the listeners, just to let you know, I'm not, we'll see what plays out. But certainly what we do know is that this time is different. Bitcoin was born in the 2008 financial crisis as an antidote to poor central banking policy to solve the problem of trust. As Satoshi talks about, trust is required to make it all work. You have to trust your bank. You have to trust the central bank. You have to trust the payment processors. Bitcoin solves that problem. And when we look at Bitcoin's adoption, the bull runs that we've had in 2011, 2013, 2017, and now, well, except for now, sorry, those previous 3 cycles occurred in a macro bull market. Macro market meaning the mainstream financial markets. These were purely retail speculative cycles. Bitcoin's true value as a store value of Gold 2.0, people didn't really care about that during the big, macro bull run because everything seemed fine. But now with COVID, everyone's going, oh shit, everything is not okay. This is not going to be all right. I don't trust my government. I don't trust how they've responded to COVID. I'm worried about money printing. I'm worried about the value of my money. Stonks are going crazy. This is really uncomfortable. Like, what's going on? And that's where Bitcoin's value properly shines. And so there's a couple different things that line up with Bitcoin in this cycle that make it what I call a super cycle. One is narrative market fit. There are no other competing narratives for Bitcoin other than Gold 2.0 within Bitcoin's narrative, kind of narrative grouping. And then even outside of Bitcoin, the crypto narrative is Gold 2.0. Like, there are no ICO or Ethereum narratives really competing. It's basically Bitcoin, and that's it, which creates a stronger Schelling point in value and price appreciation for Bitcoin. We also have, again, the macro environment. Bitcoin is now being recognized globally by all these institutions as a store of value. I mean, I waited 8 years to see this moment happen. I mean, it's crazy. You guys have been around longer than I have, and we were considered lunatics, especially back in 2011.
Especially Max.
I mean,
yeah.
we were.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're all a little weird in our own way, but we were considered by the mainstream financial world as lunatics. They're like, no way, this is Bitcoin, funny money. But now to see everyone go, actually, y'all are right. 21 million hard cap makes total sense in this environment with unlimited money printing. That's huge. And we're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars of institutional money that is going to start to trickle and is actually starting to flow into Bitcoin to preserve value. And so we've got that, we've got the narrative market fit. Then we've also got Bitcoin's normal market cycles, which coincidentally lines up with this macro cycle, this macro bear market. So Bitcoin's 4-year cycle, 4-year cycle occurs, and we hypothesize the halvings have an effect on this. So 2021, even if COVID hadn't existed, is when we would expect Bitcoin to have a bull run. So this bull run is corresponding right when the world is losing faith in their local government money. And so that's where I know that I don't know what's going to happen, but I know it's going to be a lot different than all the other cycles. That's where, we could see a moment where we have like a 2013 occur, which was one of the normal cycles where we had 2 bull runs. Bitcoin went 100x in 1 year, from $10 to $260 down to 100, then to 100 to 1200. And so we could see that, where people are predicting, they go, oh, well, we've got the 2012 halving, we've got the 2016 halving, and we have these corresponding bull runs. We think that the 2021 bull run will be less. And I'm like, I don't really understand that logic. They're sort of extrapolating off of 2 data points. I don't really think that makes too much sense. And that's where, for me, this could be the moment when the world recognizes Bitcoin. Like, this won't be a normal cycle where Bitcoin moves from 0.1% of the population to 0.5% of the population. It could be moving from 0.1 to 5%, something like that, which is even still very small, but a huge magnitude shift. So yeah, I just think we won't see a normal cycle. We'll either see a ton of price appreciation where Bitcoin blows past all estimates of what we think it is. I mean, there's a ton of estimates that range from 100K to 400K, or kind of the typical range of what people would expect. But maybe we blow up to 1 million, right? And then as well, I think there might be a more subdued bear market. In the previous bear markets, there wasn't a lot of content out there. There wasn't the Orange Pill podcast. There wasn't all the other podcasts that we all listen to. This builds faith and trust in Bitcoin. The bear markets occur because speculators come in, they just came for the speculation and they never understood the sound money aspect. If they come in and understand the sound money aspect, they become more hardened hodlers, which means that we may see less severe bear markets. Instead of an 80% drawdown, we might see a 40% drawdown, because the world is waking up to Bitcoin's value. This doesn't make too much sense to me to see like the world suddenly abandon Bitcoin's value prop just because it got a little too hot. People need this to solve a problem of storing value, because their governments have policies like negative interest rates. $18 trillion across the world is in negatively yielding bonds. And that's fucking crazy, right? like negative $18 trillion. People are paying other people to so like, for example, it'd be like the credit card company paying me to take on loans, which is insane. So certainly Bitcoin is undervalued at this moment. It has tremendous price appreciation. And I would very, very much doubt, with the amount of education we have, with the tools we have, that people won't be more resilient and a harder hodler in this next bear market. I mean, it was very lonely in the 2015 bear market. Very, very lonely. I mean, there wasn't this camaraderie on Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, all these different places to socialize with Bitcoiners and build up this trust with it. And now we've got that. So I'm just really, I'm excited to see what happens in 2021, 2022. It certainly won't be like the last cycles.
Speaking of narratives and the importance of these narratives to the competing sort of institutions or monies. So let's compare fiat, the US dollar system, and the stonks go higher nonstop. A lot of that relies on all those day traders. Oh, like this narrative that we saw unfold over the past 2 weeks of Wall Street bets, the David versus Goliath, taking on the hedge funds. And, people like Dave Portnoy were out there, we're day traders, we're taking down these hedge funds. And they thought they were having real red steak, and they found out their steak was not real. And they had been on the blue pill this whole time because the steak got taken away as soon as, it impacted the Goliaths out there. They got shut off from buying any more GameStop. They, the hedge funds crushed them in the end. But you started to see people realize, hey, like we're in a rigged system. Even if we feel like we're like winning compared to some of the other people in this system, like we're always going to lose at the end of the day. The house will always win in this situation. How do you feel that sort of narrative played out on the population of day traders and Wall Street bet sort of community?
Yeah, that was a fascinating look at retail sentiment around the existing financial system and how they felt disenfranchised. I wrote about this in the Rebellion Begins, which was my newsletter last week. I actually had something else lined up, and I'm like, you know what? No one's going to want to read this. I got to scrap that and write about what's going on with our Wall Street bets and what exactly is playing out. I think it's what happened last week is representative of a larger frustration and a movement around people feel the system is rigged, and it is. So people are finally waking up to this reality. They're waking up from the matrix and they're going, what the fuck? They're going, like what's going on? This is crazy. Wait a second. So the house never loses. And so, people are starting to wake up to that reality. And naturally with the psychology of mass movements, you've got like Black Lives Matter, for example. When people protested during Black Lives Matter, that actually represented a lot of other movements as well, because you can't go rally and build 20 different protests on a Saturday, and have 20 different groups meet up together under 20 different rallying cries. Black Lives Matter became the rallying cry for a lot of other sentiment. I'm not trying to diminish their cause or try to diminish what they were fighting for, but people are just looking for a cause to rally behind. Same with our Wall Street bets. Like that was representative of like this movement to stick it to these hedge funds. I mean, one of them was Stevie Cohen, the guy who literally paid a $1.8 billion bribe to the SEC to get away with insider trading. I mean, he was part of this crew, right? So people were like, it doesn't matter about AMC, right? Like who gives a shit that it's AMC or Tootsie Roll or whatever people are buying? It was just the fact that this could stick it to them, right? That was the whole point. And I think, when you have these revolutionary vibes, this rebellious vibe ebb and flow, it has to append itself upon something long lasting. AMC was not going to be a long-lasting narrative to append your revolution to. It's a movie theater stock that was rightfully very shorted because it was going out of business. Bitcoin is a permanent narrative. Bitcoin has survived for 12 years. The hodlers, the believers in it, have increased in size and intensity and in content to where this group of frustrated folks on the retail trading side were looking for somewhere to find home, and Bitcoin is that long-term home. Whether or not they figure that out yet is a different conversation. But I do suspect that as people become more disenfranchised and become, more critical of their governments, Bitcoin is such a natural Schelling point for that revolution to land. People care about preserving wealth. This isn't like, oh, I'm going to go protest at my local politician's office. You vote with your pocketbook. I mean, that's pretty much how people vote across the world. And Bitcoin is such an easy way to participate in a revolution. You don't have to paint a sign. You don't even have to tell anyone you're part of the revolution. You just buy Bitcoin and hodl, and then you're part of the revolution. So I think we're going to see other events like that happen, and finally people realizing that Bitcoin is the flag to fall under for that sentiment.
Yeah, I always say you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And Bitcoin changes things. It changes people. It changes lots of stuff. Bitcoin has turned the stock market into a shitcoin market. People look at AMC, they look at GameStop, they look at Tootsie Roll like shitcoins. They're just game pieces and they're shitposting. And Dave Portnoy went from like a bad day trader to a shitposter. And he's saying, I blew out of my meme stocks, right? That could be from a chat board on a shitcoin from 5 years ago. And that's because Bitcoin has turned everything else that's not Bitcoin into shit, pretty much. And you've either got to decide whether you want to be on the Bitcoin side of things or you want to be a kind of on the opposite side. And taking the opposite side of Bitcoin are some of the rhetoric coming out of the nation states who we hear this story now that they're going to ban Bitcoin. You've written a brilliant synopsis where you've kind of encapsulated all the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we've heard for years and years now. But before getting into that, you did mention this word, the term Schelling point. So for those who don't know what that means, give them the quick Dan Held 101 Schelling point. Dan.
I would define a Schelling point as like a natural, organic place that individuals rally behind. For example, if Max, Stacy, and I if we were all stuck in a city, like let's say New York City, there might be, even if we're not able to communicate, we would probably, there's a Schelling point behind certain locations that we would probably all decide to go meet at.
Right. The information desk at Grand Central Station is where people would go to, even if they had never communicated where to meet in an emergency. That's where they would go. But it also ties into game theory, right? There's a game theory aspect to it. And game theory is cooked into the books. And this will lead into the nation state FUD, because it seems like the game theory cooked into the Genesis block going back to 2009 has not met yet a foe that it can't game theoretically beat, whether it's this mining concentration in China FUD or any of this other FUD. And now we're at the nation state FUD. So Dan, give us the synopsis of all the FUD that you've brilliantly encapsulated and how to respond to the FUD.
Well, how much time do we have? Because there's a lot of FUD out there. There's so much FUD that we've all dealt with. On the government's attacking Bitcoin level, there's a lot of different ways to kind of pick that apart where folks go, oh, well, so a lot of this too is no coiners or people who don't believe in Bitcoin. Bitcoin rises in value and they're like, no way, this is bullshit money. There's no way this could be worth anything. And they come up with literally every possible excuse to invalidate its bull run because their mind can't comprehend that things are changing. The world is changing and they're like, no, I refuse to change. Here's some FUD. So most of this stuff is unsubstantiated. Some of this stuff has some tangibility behind it. But when it comes to government attacks on Bitcoin, that was actually, as of 30 minutes ago, what I just released, which was the crypto mass extinction event. What characteristics do crypto assets need to survive a state level attack? Bitcoin was purpose built to survive that moment. Whether it comes from like how easy it is to run a node, to the hodlers, to Satoshi not being like identifiable, not permanently attached to the project, to the economic certainty of like the security model when it comes to the block reward. Transaction fees are replacing the subsidy, which ensures that Bitcoin's long-term security looks to be fine. So all of these are like different ways to measure decentralization or ways to measure its ability to survive a state level attack. State level attacks are the entire reason why we are here. There was an argument in 2017 that, decentralization is this gradient, that you only need decentralization for like at the Bitcoin level for certain things and for other things you don't. I tend to disagree where like on the base level, like any layer one protocol has to have an incredible decentralization to survive, state level attacks. It has to be anything worthwhile, any monetary network of worthwhile nature that is uncensorable and permissionless store of value. Like it's going to piss off governments. And so inevitably it has to be so rigorous to survive that sort of thing. So when it comes to this other FUD, there's some other pieces of FUD that have been brought up around Bitcoin, which are like governments could ban it. And I think this is kind of a really silly way to look at it. When gold was banned in the US, by the way, gold's value went up. So banning something doesn't make it unused. People still use it. The war on drugs, an incredible failure, I think, by any standard. And then you have like climate change. And so for folks who are worried about climate change, they petition their government to work with other governments in order to solve it. But there's no way all the governments across the world are going to agree. And Bitcoin plays on that game theory where like not all governments are going to agree simultaneously all to ban Bitcoin, especially if one government perceives it as a threat to another one. If the U.S. or Russia, if U.S. perceives Bitcoin as a threat to Russia, then the U.S. might embrace it. And then you've got market penetration. If 30% of your population holds Bitcoin, they're going to be really pissed if you ban it. And if you're a politician in government, when you try to ban it, you're not going to get voted back in. Additionally, as we've seen with like Senator Loomis, she is now on the Senate, I think the Senate Finance Committee, which is huge. These politicians, these very wealthy individuals on the institutional side, and ultimately a president someday will own Bitcoin. And once they all do, they have a skin in the game vote to protect it. And that's where the adoption of Bitcoin, I think, is the only way to keep it, is our main best shot at enabling its survival. Is the more people we can orange pill into Bitcoin, the more people believe in it, the more the money they have stake in it, the less likely a direct attack through like direct banning would be popular. There's also other things too, where like a government is very unlikely to ban it because they could tax it, which is another form of like punishment, if you will. But I don't really see many governments going with a hard ban route, because if they've got $100 billion worth of Bitcoin wealth in their country, why not give them an easy avenue to be compliant? Now, of course, it's a sliding slope. After you disclose Bitcoin, then they might go after more. But that seems to be the more rational approach for governments to take when going after this, versus just like a hard ban.
Let's also talk about that mass crypto extinction event, because I don't know how many shitcoins there are. There's something like 8,000 of them, right? But at least some of them were originally designed and developed because of the tensions and the FUD coming from the actual Bitcoin core developers. People like Mike Hearn and Gavin Andreessen were saying Bitcoin's a disaster, it's going to die, it's going to fail. And that's when we had hard forks, but we also had forks of Bitcoin and new coins like Ethereum and stuff like that. So they were trying to replicate one single thing, whether it was smart contracts or faster transactions per second. The state of Bitcoin development now, however, and the introduction of Taproot and Schnorr and things like this, where we're going to be able to do all those smart contracts and stuff, I suppose all those 8,000 coins are always going to have some bag holder somewhere, right? Trying to get somebody to buy it off them. But I mean, is Bitcoin at the place now where it's just nonsensical to try to develop any sort of competition to it?
I come about this from a product mindset. So I've worked at 5 different crypto companies. I've also worked at Uber. The way that I approach problem solving is thinking through it from a product perspective, which is around what problem is my product solving? Like if I build a ride sharing app, what problem is it solving for my ride sharing customers? If you're Satoshi and you're building Bitcoin, you're like, cool, what does Bitcoin solve? Bitcoin solves, and this is what Silicon Valley terminology means, Bitcoin solves the largest addressable problem in the world, which is storing value, because value underpins everything. In Bitcoin's TAM, so total addressable market, that's a terminology that we use in Silicon Valley to show the maximum size of what something could be. Bitcoin's TAM is in the hundreds of trillions. It is the biggest TAM you could ever go after in terms of problem solving. So when folks want to change Bitcoin to let it do other things like, oh, we should make it more malleable for having it be an easy way to pay for coffee, or more malleable to have these sophisticated smart contracts. Why? I mean, it's solving the problem of storing value, which is the largest TAM in the world. And it's doing that, and it's succeeding. You don't fix it if it ain't broken. and Bitcoin's success as this global store of value, I think, is a once in a human existence opportunity where, like, if Bitcoin fails, we don't do it again, maybe for a few hundred more years. Like, we've got one shot at it. So I think it's very critical that we don't insert our own whims of what we want it to be. We observe the protocol, how it's being used, which is as a store of value, and it's doing that so eloquently, so perfectly. We don't need to change that. And that's where I think largely the Bitcoin community has rallied behind the idea of pushing other more innovative or different technological improvements onto different layers above Bitcoin, like Lightning on layer 2. And then, with Taproot, that is being like something that's done very carefully and through a lot of thinking, and it doesn't really change Bitcoin that much. It's just incremental improvements. I think the community has largely understood, like, we got this rocket off of Earth. It didn't explode on the launch pad. It didn't explode in orbit. We already went past the moon, and we're on our way to Mars. No need to tinker with the engines or swap out the engines or tinker with the fins. And this is what the Ethereum community, they don't understand. You're swapping out your engine mid-flight and you're changing around who's flying the vehicle inside. So like you're swapping out pilots at the same time, and then you're changing out the fuel source. And the risk there is huge. And we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I just, for me, Bitcoin is already very successful. It has proven it has protocol market fit. There's no need to change it. It will continue on that trajectory of being successful if we just don't touch it.
Right. So, Dan, you mentioned you've been involved in 5 companies. I believe you've started and sold 2 companies in the Bitcoin space. You're over there at Kraken. You're in Silicon Valley. And Coinbase, Silicon Valley heavyweights, going to go public apparently in the first quarter of 2021. Some are talking about it being a $100 billion market cap. So, the Silicon Valley crowd was not too fast to get into it either, aside from Tim Draper, who picked up a lot of coins on the auction from Silk Road. But obviously Silicon Valley is now firmly going to go Bitcoin wacko with Coinbase going public. Is the Valley, what's their current thought? Are they all in on Bitcoin now, or is it still some hesitation? And what can we expect from Kraken going forward? Obviously, Kraken's a huge name also. Any chatter about Kraken possibly testing the IPO waters? Dan, I don't want you to get in trouble, but if you can add any color, that would be interesting.
Well, we could touch on the Kraken part first, and then I'll go to the other pieces. I can't talk about that, guys. But appreciate you bringing up the question.
We tried, though, Dan. We tried.
Yep. I know everyone's interested. I think we're looking very optimistically, and we're like, this is really cool to see. We respect Coinbase folks. Like we're heads down building. We're both suffering from the same issues of having too many customers. It's wild. I mean, it's been a incredible bull run here where we're seeing a surge in signups. We saw like a massive surge earlier this year. I think Jesse said 6x in the number of signups. So this was huge, and I know they're going through the same thing. So for us, and if their IPO goes well, that's certainly positive for us. Whether or not that's part of our plans, I don't know anything about that. So I think Coinbase IPOing is great for the industry as a whole. It's great for companies like Kraken. If you look at other crypto exchanges to invest in, Kraken's in a pretty good spot where it's one of the few legally compliant, highly liquid exchanges in the world that haven't already been bought, like Bitstamp. So Kraken's in a great spot there. I think enthusiasm internally is super high as we've got some cool new products coming out that should, to kind of level up our competitiveness in terms of feature set. So really excited about that stuff. Switching gears and looking at Silicon Valley, I feel like I'm shilling my newsletter too much, but I wrote about how Silicon Valley doesn't understand Bitcoin. And what was really cool is after I wrote this and I posted it on Twitter, I had like a couple dozen people come out and be like, this was my exact experience in Silicon Valley. So it was really cool to know that I wasn't just off on my own tangent writing and people didn't really see what I saw. So Silicon Valley is all about the VCs and the builders. The builders are the ones who are building tech companies, startups, bigger tech companies, et cetera. And their mindsets are antithetical to understanding Bitcoin. And here's why. For the builders, they have to constantly innovate. Facebook looks a whole lot different than what it used to be back when it first started. If you're not innovating, you're stagnating and dying. You always have to be shipping and pushing new code. So the idea that Bitcoin was almost perfect when it launched is unfathomable for these people. These builders just don't understand that mindset. It's antithetical to anything they've ever done before. And then, when they, and then the idea that that you shouldn't change it, they really don't get that. Like that is the value prop. You don't want to change it. If you change it, you don't want the foundation of the world's financial system to be constantly changing. You want it to be static and secure and trustworthy. So on the builder side, that's the biggest mental blocker. And that's why they like Ethereum so much, because it always is changing. And then on the VC side, VCs, what they do is they hunt for new hot trends. And in those new hot trends, they start to deploy capital that's been given to them by their investors. So they take that money and they go invest it in different startups. For them, there's different narrative cycles that they need to append their capital allocation to. For Bitcoin, there's been a couple. The payments narrative in 2013 with PayPal, like PayPal competition, et cetera. That was a big one. But then when the narratives cool off, they abandon it. They don't want to touch it. That was a hot new narrative a year ago, but they don't want to touch that now because their investors don't care about it. They're not going to be perceived as smart by allocating into that. So VC suffer from this problem of the best time to invest for them would be when something isn't hot, but it's hardest for them financially to do that because it looks poorly. And so VCs are not, and this was just something I really had to like kind of reconcile. VCs are not contrarian at all. They very much invest in what's hot. They do not invest in what's different. And you also have this problem where like top VCs like A16Z, Sequoia, Benchmark, when they invest in something, then all the other VCs have to invest in something similar because their LPs are calling them up and they're like, why aren't you in the Sequoia round? Why aren't you in the A16Z round for X, Y, or Z, scooters, VR, Bitcoin drones, whatever it may be. Also, valuations are a signal to the market. So these valuations signal that things are happening. There's developer interest, there's VC interest, there's product market fit being found. But valuations in crypto are not that. Valuations in crypto do not signal product market fit or protocol market fit. They can be very disconnected from reality. And so they see this interest, and in 2017 they saw this interest in ICOs and Ethereum, and they're like, well, something's happened here. I have no idea what it is, but this is a signal to me that something's relevant, especially the developer side as well. VCs look at developers as the signal for something new and hot. So when developers pour into Ethereum, they're like, I have no idea what these developers are talking about, but this seems really interesting because a lot of them are interested. They're not dumb people. Like VCs are smart. They just don't have the mental capacity to be an expert in all these different topics. So they rely on signals to help them decipher where deal flow should go. Like where should my capital flow? Where will the deals be? And so they rely on these like local experts, and so they, that's why they really latched onto the Ethereum narrative, especially in 2015 when Ethereum was created. The App Store was very popular at that time. All the most popular tech companies, Uber, Airbnb, were apps. So you had apps, app platform, dApps, dApp platform. It was perfect narrative market fit. Vitalik promised them this decentralized world. This was something like of a holy grail of a concept narrative-wise for Silicon Valley. So VCs could not help but FOMO into it. And yeah, so over time, though, I do think like as that narrative faded away, the Schelling point and narrative fit of Bitcoin has become better in Silicon Valley. It's still very Ethereum focused. I've heard at other large exchanges that I'm not going to mention that it is detrimental to be a pro Bitcoiner at certain Bitcoin or certain crypto companies in the Bay Area. And so, so what happens is, Ethereum is still very popular because it's developer centric. It's like the new Bitcoin, but I would say like 50 to 60% of people who believed in Ethereum back in 17 have either abandoned the space or switched over to Bitcoin. So the tide is very much changing, especially with Elon and Jack Dorsey endorsing Bitcoin. I think those guys are huge tech giants and they're very much a signal. Jack Dorsey took a huge political risk when he endorsed Bitcoin in Silicon Valley. I mean, that was not popular. And in Silicon Valley, you were not allowed to go against the grain. Whatever is woke, whatever is cool, that's what you pile in on. And if you're not doing that, you're ostracized. So for myself, I mean, I definitely took a reputational hit by being in 2017 for going like, I only like Bitcoin. And people were like, you're out of your mind. Ethereum is going to be everything. And I wasn't invited to certain events. I wasn't included in certain conversations because I believed in Bitcoin. It was ridiculous. I'm not comparing myself to Jack, but Jack on a 100-fold magnitude level must have experienced a similar thing.
Right. In 2017, of course, that's when all the VCs were like in this space, pumping ICOs and dumping those on retail investors. But on the other coast, we have the hedge fund land, and the analysis and the understanding, the deep understanding of Bitcoin from that sector is just remarkable, triggered by one of the alpha dogs of all of them, and that's Paul Tudor Jones in the second quarter of 2020 with his amazing letter to his shareholders explaining why he was going long Bitcoin. And his understanding of it, like he had a deep fundamental understanding of the long play on this and betting, he said, on the future of humanity, on human ingenuity, which is just like one of the most amazing things in our 10 years in Bitcoin that I've ever heard anybody say. And here's this guy saying this, and that really, he was the very first of the very first of the big guys. Like before Michael Saylor, there was Paul Tudor Jones saying this. What do you think of, in our last few moments here, like what the hedge funds, all these hedge funds piling in, including NYDIG and Stan Druckenmiller and stuff like that. So what do you think of these guys coming into the place?
Hugely validating. I mean, these are some of the most well-respected macro investors in the world, where they look at these trends of how different assets rise and fall. And for them to validate or christen Bitcoin as Gold 2.0 is a rite of passage for Bitcoin to go from what was us, like the very niche, very small group, to becoming mainstream. So I would say this is a christening moment for Bitcoin, and it's a very good one. They've all endorsed it and understand it, which is really cool too, because I think for them it's a little bit tougher to grok, and it took them a while. But now the career risk of going, I like Bitcoin, has been removed, which means the floodgates will open, because it was a bit of a chicken and egg problem. If a mainstream, Paul Tudor Jones style individual didn't endorse Bitcoin, the reputational risk would be too high to go advocate for it at your fund. Now that's all been removed, and everyone's piling in, including insurance funds, and we'll see sovereign wealth funds come in. And this is where it gets really exciting. As Bitcoin's market cap goes up and liquidity goes up, then these giant market participants, Bitcoin is the only one big enough for them to participate in. And sovereign wealth funds don't even think, I think some of them might have $100 million or $1 billion might be their minimum investment size, because they have $1 trillion under management. So Bitcoin is, this was a huge moment for Bitcoin to be validated by these institutional folks. That happened. The institutional infrastructure has already been built. This is the floodgates are now available to be let open.
All right. Well, I think that's a really important thing, the reputational risk, because, Fidelity is one of the biggest investment asset managers in the world. They've been involved in Bitcoin for a very long time, but we're not very public about it. But I think the likes of Paul Tudor Jones, and then, of course, Paul Tudor Jones led, Stan Druckenmiller led BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world. And, I think there's no reputational risk at all now. And certainly on that coast, as you say, in Silicon Valley, it's like it's only just starting to be acceptable, but there's still more pro.
Well, it's interesting to describe Silicon Valley like that, because it sounds a lot like Hollywood, where it's very trendy, and people want to be seen at the right parties with the right people and follow the right trends. And you can quickly find yourself ostracized if you're not super trendy. And as a result, you miss a lot of opportunities. You're not a contrarian in any sense of the word. And it goes against the perception of a VC who's a contrarian by nature. But what I'm hearing, was being described, is that it's very tribal and not contrarian really at all. I guess in that context, Tim Draper must stand out. Was Tim Draper just such a huge fund that he can do whatever he wants and he doesn't give a fuck? Is that the thing with Tim Draper?
Pretty much, yeah. His family is kind of known as a little bit, kind of different. So they're sort of perceived as kind of the wild ones, the weird ones a little bit, which I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean that as a compliment. And so they were, I think it's all his own money too. So he's kind of free to do whatever he wants with it, versus like a VC, and they have LPs or investors in their fund. And those investors might be like, well, what the hell are you doing buying Bitcoin? Whereas Tim Draper's like, well, I got $1 billion. I'm going to go put 100 million in. I don't care what anyone else thinks. It's more like a family office in a way. Like Tim Draper investing was more like a family office investment.
Yeah. Well, being in Bitcoin back then, what was it, like 2013 maybe, where he bought the coins from the U.S. Marshals? It was a pretty seismic moment. It was like the first of a sort of Paul Tudor Jones sort of moment, because you were like, what? This like Silicon Valley dude bought these Bitcoin?
Yeah, during the Silk Road period, it was Charlie Shrem had been arrested and jailed, and Silk Road was going on, and we were involved. And I remember thinking, this could be too hot. Maybe this is just too hot to handle.
Yeah.
And when Tim Draper came along, it really cooled everything down. Like, okay, well, this guy, I trust him. He's been established in his business for quite some time, and it just cooled everything down.
Totally. I think him and the Winklevi, I think, were the two biggest participants in 2013 that largely validated the space. Yeah, I think like people forget how risky it was back in the day. They're like, oh, well, if I had heard about Bitcoin when it was $10, I would have bought a whole bunch. I'm like, bullshit. No way. You would have bought it at 10 and sold it at 20, or bought it at 10 and sold it at 5. Like the wallet infrastructure was so awful. The Mt. Gox was 90% of trading volume when Silk Road got shut down, we're like, well, was that all demand? Like, will demand come back? When Mt. Gox shut down, we're like, will an exchange infrastructure be built? These were very pivotal and critical moments. And then with the DPR funds, we weren't sure if those coins were just going to hit the market and like all of a sudden the market was going to puke, right? And Tim Draper coming in and buying them, I think instilled confidence back to the market, like you guys were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember after Charlie Shrem was arrested, and Kaiser Report was the one like talking about Bitcoin and pushing it all over the world. And I remember thinking, are we going to get arrested when we fly to New York? Like, I thought, like, uh-oh.
Yeah, no, it was palpably nervous for a few days there. Like, holy shit, what is this going?
What have we been talking about?
My God, how do I walk away from this?
Yeah, people forget that. I thought my door was going to get kicked in too.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. But well, thanks so much for being on Orange Pill Podcast and giving us your time. It was really interesting. And where can people sign up for your newsletter?
Yeah, danheld.substack.com. So it's an email newsletter that comes out once a week for paid subscribers, once every 4 weeks for non-paid. It's basically, if you want my unfiltered opinion on Bitcoin on various topics, that's where you're going to get it in the long form. You get that stuff on Twitter too, but this one I just kind of like sit down, have a couple glasses of whiskey, and just let it flow. And it's sort of my purest writing.
Yeah, I came, for the information, but I stayed for the prose.
Oh yeah, the Q&A should be fun. If you sign up, there's a Q&A where you're able to ask me any question you like. I'm trying out my first one. We'll see if that turns out okay. I've never done a Q&A before on my own, so it's probably not going to turn out great, but we'll eventually nail that down. And then, there's also some other features. You can vote on the next topic, which is kind of fun. I polled my users and they said they really like this. So I think it's kind of cool because you can somewhat choose the destiny of what I write about next.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. I've got my margarita and I'm ready for the Q&A session with Dan Held at his newsletter.
Dan,
I think Max got some toxoplasmosis during that little flip from the interview with Dan.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great business for Silicon Valley. It could be like Carvel ice cream meets cat poop. You get different flavors of cat poop. If you want toxoplasmosis, you got raspberry, chocolate, strawberry, all your favorite flavors, the machines, shake it up. You lose all empathy. You're one with deep fucking value and roaring kitty. And you too can join Wall Street Bets and have a fantastically failed short squeeze.
Yeah, right. Well, we already mocked the weekends.
Oh, Dave
Portnoy.
That's a guy with the
poor
weekends.
Guy. But the thing that really stood out to me there with the call with Dan Held, the thing I hadn't heard you had because you had a Silicon Valley, a .com company, but that is the TAM, that the biggest TAM belongs to Bitcoin, right? The total addressable market.
Right. The total addressable market. That's phenomenal because the total addressable market is literally in the hundreds of trillions of dollars, as Dan pointed out. And for this reason, you can't stop being excited about it. That's one of the jargon of Silicon Valley is the TAM,
so why are they not excited about it? I mean, that's really interesting that these VCs are not interested in it versus the hedge funds because let's face it, the VCs were at the forefront of U.S. capital markets through the 90s and 2000s. And 2000, like this whole .com bubble 1.0 and now 2.0, Facebook, Uber, all these huge multi-billionaires and stuff like that. Square, Cash App, Twitter.
Yeah, because he explained it, because coders love to code. And Bitcoin was a virginal birth. It was this perfect birth.
And you want to develop slowly, right? You don't want to...
very little of it, it's virtually was born into existence, virtually perfect. And then there's been some tinkering on the side, but not wholesale development projects. And he's saying that in Silicon Valley, right? The VCs keep their ear to the ground so that where the developer tribes are going, and the developers like to develop. They like to write code. And with Bitcoin, there's not really much to do. It was born perfect. So you don't get any signal, as he was saying, from developers.
Right. I mean, I see that because I've never used Ethereum. I don't know about it, but I do see it go through my timeline no matter what in Twitter. And it's always like there's some new, they're on version 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0 or 5.0. And it's another hard fork and it's going to do this. And then they move away from proof of work to proof of stake. And it's like, it goes through my stream and I'm just like, what the hell is going on?
So it feeds the culture in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so
that's
a cultural thing. And then they're saying with the VCs themselves, they follow the developers, into whatever's trendy. And they're not, they don't try to mess with that formula. So the herd of developers are all over the world's programmable computer project that is still in alpha. Now, I don't think it's even gotten to beta yet. And they ignore Bitcoin, even though it has a TAM of the hundreds of trillions of dollars, except for Tim Draper, who's really investing his own money and is a wild card out there. And he likes to wear a Bitcoin tie, which we thank him very much for that.
Well, but this is coming full circle because Max, you were on Wall Street during the era. There was no real Silicon Valley at that time in the 80s. It was all about the guys on Wall Street. It was the hedge fund guys. It was the Jimmy Goldsmiths. It was the Paul Tudor Joneses of the world. It was all those sort of guys, financial engineers. And then you were in Los Angeles and California for the dot-com boom. And that was the era where they came to the fore and they were huge. But if Bitcoin is what we believe, Renaissance 2.0, and, ending, like slaying all these zombies of our political, cultural, societal, financial, monetary systems, then there's a new beginning. And you're saying perhaps that the financial engineers of Wall Street on the East Coast, New Jersey, Connecticut, that these guys are going to be at the forefront.
Well, I remember in the 80s, when I was a broker on Wall Street, we did take public Apple and Microsoft. And that was certainly the beginning of hardware and software and huge explosion in technology. And which we then had the dot-com boom in Los Angeles in the 80s that I was a part of at that time. And then we got into Bitcoin. And in terms of who's going to lead the revolution, obviously the Michael Saylor, who's a tech guy, but he doesn't seem like he's a Silicon Valley darling. He's in
DC, right? Baltimore.
His history was back in the dot-com boom, the stock of MicroStrategy traded in the thousands of dollars per share. It collapsed by over 90% or 95%.
Mm-hmm.
He is uniquely the only CEO to survive that entire period. And he's still CEO of MicroStrategy. And the stock got down into the pretty low valuations, pretty low numbers before the current run, where the market cap is doubled and tripled because now they're into Bitcoin. But he is a guy who it was like a starving beast waiting for that the opportunity to arise, to pounce. And, the patience involved were just waiting year after year. Suddenly, when the Bitcoin came over and his engineer mind kicked in and he's like, wait a minute. This thing can go to $1 million. I can put X on my balance sheet and I'm going to be at the top table once again, which is great to see because I think he's going to change corporate America, change Silicon Valley. He's a guy who's going to lead huge portions of the economy into Bitcoin.
Right. And I think, it's important to remember that he stared at Bitcoin back in 2013 and 14 and he didn't like it. And now Michael Saylor loves it. Like when he went full Bitcoin, he went full Bitcoin. And that's what I'm saying. I'm bringing it back to the cats is like I told you a story a few weeks ago. I told you this story of my cat, Rocky, and I would stare into her eyes and she would stare at me and then she would like look at me and her eyes would go really, like her pupils would go really wide and then she'd like smash me in the face.
Oh, right.
And that's what I'm saying is like maybe Satoshi was a breakaway cat of this zombie simulation. Like Satoshi could be a cat that created this. And that's why like when we stare at Bitcoin. Bitcoin stares back at
Well,
us.
cats
and
are
it's
so
not.
mystical. Going back to Egypt,
Yeah.
I believe they were worshipped as gods,
Yeah.
and they still possess that godlike quality about them. And it's the cat's world. We just live in it type quality about it. They own the internet. They obviously hacked the internet somehow. There must be a centralized or decentralized kitty cat network of intelligence behind this simulation. And Bitcoin, I remember I said it was the way God was hack his way back into our reality to try to fix his invention because it looked like it was about to blow up. But maybe it's actually kitty cats. Kitty cats are hacking their way back into, and they're maybe they're just doing it for the lulls.
Well, they of course have that magical quality of landing on their feet at all times.
Right.
We saw this a video clip on some BBC documentary about how cats fall and why they always land on their feet. It's pretty amazing. But so that's why they have 9 lives they're considered, but it's just being centered. They have this weird centering.
Wasn't David Bowie in some film called Cat People? I think here's the thing you got to do: carry around like something that looks like a snake or a cucumber. And if you meet somebody that you think might be a cat, like have them like hide the cucumber near them. And then when they see it, if they jump crazy, that means they're actually a cat. Because if you ever do that to cats, they do like flips and they think it's a snake and they avoid it. Right. So carry that with you. If you think you meet somebody like this guy, Deep fucking value / roaring kitty, if they put a fake snake on the ground and if he jumps like a maniac away from it, he's actually a cat.
I think that could be exposing the simulation. I think there's something out there outside this matrix of this simulation that we're in that looks like there might be some monster that looks like that we don't know about, but who knows. And the other thing is that cats, of course, they don't need any approval. And I think that's a very Bitcoin sort of thing, right? Like
no permission.
Yeah, it's permissionless, but they don't seek approval. Like anybody who was driving a Lambo back in the 2017 period, I'm sorry, but that's a person who's desperate for approval, right? Like cats don't care about that stuff, right? They don't need approval. They don't need you to like them. They don't need you to they just need you to obey them, right? They're like, just go make my lunch and shut the fuck up. Just go do it.
Right. So Dan Held, I think, really brilliantly encapsulated all that in the interview so that...
But not in a crazy way like we're doing.
He did it in a Dan way. See, Dan made it all make like Bitcoin sense because he's working at that company. He's got a proper,
He's the head of growth, right?
Growth over there, cracking, like whatever that is. Who nobody knows what that is. He's like, talk to Dan. He's the head of growth. It's like, what does that mean? It's like, I got a growth right here. I don't know what it's about. Talk to Dan. He's the head of growth. He'll tell you what's wrong with that or what's right with it. You never know. It could be, hey, that could be the next. They could have a total addressable market of like $15 gazillion. You never know. Talk to Dan. Dan knows. Dan's the guy.
Right. Well, I didn't even finish my margarita because we've been having so many interesting talks about this zombie situation and how to fight the zombies. And the only tool left, like they tried zombie versus zombie. That's the last level of the game. Okay.
Right,
Wall Street Bets tried that. They tried to reanimate. That's what you have to do. You have to reanimate the zombie and get him to fight the other zombies because two of the undead have to fight each other, right? But we have Bitcoin, and that's beyond any of this. It's beyond the reach of the zombies.
Totally. It totally is beyond the reach. It's on its own vector, as I've been saying. It's the escape route out of the simulation, out of the game, to use the matrix as an analogy, right? Yeah. You had to get out of the matrix or understand the matrix. And Bitcoin is that jetway out. And
well, it's beyond the undead, right? Because the undead have never encountered the game theory of the protocol. So even if they come at it, there's no way to stop it. Like it's beyond the undead, it's beyond FUD, it's beyond any of that stuff. So the undead zombies rely on FUD, right? They need you to be in deep panic and fear because what do? Like how you could, a zombie can catch up to you even though they're like walking like a catatonic state because you're all in panic and you're doing dumb decisions and you're taking dumb decisions and you're like going into debt and you're racking up 500,000 debt in here for your degree that means nothing and in communication studies, and then you're racking up more debt here for a Lambo, and you're doing like those are bad decisions because the zombies all around you.
Because your zombies have scared you into panic debting.
They panic you into doing these things in order to get approval from other people and to fit in with this, so that the zombies don't come for you, because you need to fit into this place. Otherwise, you stand out and the zombies come for you.
Right, right. So there's nothing left on any exchanges, New York Stock Exchange, or that hasn't been zombified.
They're all zombified,
right?
Except for MicroStrategy now, because it put Bitcoin on its balance sheet.
MicroStrategy is going to escape zombie land. Played by Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson will play Michael Saylor in the new adaptation of Zombieland about Bitcoin's path out of the vortex run by a simulated kiddie game. And I think that would be an excellent reason for me not to sell any Bitcoin.
Exactly. So, well, speaking of cats and speaking of zombies and speaking of all that, Sphinx Chat, where you can find us. You can join our tribe. Go to tribes.sphinx.chat and you'll see a bunch of podcasts there. Thanks to Adam Curry. He helped us. Last week, he took like an hour and a half out of his day.
Oh, yeah. Adam
walked
Curry,
us through setting up the, our Lightning node, and then adding us onto the Sphinx Chat and doing all that stuff. But what that enables you to do is obviously it's deplatformable, right? So it's zombie proof.
Right.
So the zombies of this decaying empire and political system can't take us down and remove us, so that you don't get free of the zombies, right? So it's on the Lightning network.
Isn't the Sphinx, the head is attached to like a lion, a cat?
Yeah, it's like some sort of lion cat out there in Egypt.
Another theme. Thematically, I see it all comes together.
If it's all in
Sphinx
here,
Chat.
the cat, see, like here's like the Sphinx eyes, right?
Right.
So, you go to there, and if you tap on our show, it shows you a QR code of how to join us. So you'll need that on your Zap wallet or whatever, to join us, to get to attach to us. So you have to download Sphinx Chat as well. But you'll figure it out, and it's also a way to start streaming us some sats and
streaming sats. Yeah,
streaming sats.
That's the future.
It's pretty cool. I mean, the last I looked, we had 8 members of our tribe, and we were getting like 99 sats, 33
So
sats.
if somebody's listening to the podcast on Sphinx Chat, it automatically streams us sats.
Yeah, because when you join it, when you become a member of the Sphinx Chat, listening to these podcasts, what you're doing is you say, I'm going to pay 1 sat per minute, or 10 sats per minute, or 20 sats per minute. And whatever you choose, you could determine that. So if you end up listening to the whole hour and 20 minutes of this podcast, we'll get for 120 times whatever you had determined per minute. So that's the way that it happens. Or maybe I over exaggerated. Maybe
Right.
60,
So
80,
it could get,
80.
you could get like 10 cents, streaming to us in sats for an hour and a half, or you can elect to do it at a higher rate, a lower rate. I think the minimum is 1 sat per minute, right? So this is micropayments applied to content. And Adam Curry is really doing an incredible job putting this all together. This is the next stage of a podcast. And of course, Adam Curry kind of invented podcasting.
He's the podfather.
He's the podfather. So this is the next big
he's
thing.
doing amazing stuff. Like, he's working on a whole bunch of other stuff he told us about. Like, he's like, it's all coming there. So, that space is like, as Dan mentions, like being early Bitcoin, it was crazy, right? Like, it was so easy to lose your Bitcoin. It was totally ramshackle. It was totally anarchic. It's hard to describe. It was like being surrounded by all these crazy cats in some sort of Cairo, pyramid dungeon.
It's
and
like the production of Cats on Broadway, but every single cast member was played by Shecky Green.
No, it was played by Deep Fucking Valley.
Was played by Deep Fucking Valley.
Played by this guy.
Every cat in the production of Cats. La, da, 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 da,
Of course, it's like the Matrix, right? Agent Smith is the same, right? There's an eternal number of Agent Smiths. They all look the same.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Another major clue.
it's all there if you just look at it. That's why swanbitcoin.com/orange pill sponsors the show, because we find these connections.
We find it all for you.
They understand.
We decode it. We decipher it.
We just code it. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining us for this episode of Orange Pill Podcast. And
That's the last time I eat macadamia nuts before I do the podcast, because I noticed I kept spitting them out throughout this entire show.
I think I do see on YouTube our data that about 56% of our audience are millennials. So they love that shit. They're like,
Really?
okay, boomer, look at that boomer. They're in the comments like, look at that boomer spewing
Look
food
at that
all
guy.
over
He
the
can't
place.
eat his macadamia nuts. What a joker. Jesus.
They'd like to see boomers spitting food.
I guess so. That's my demographic.
All right. Bye, y'all. Look how strong your hands are.
Look, I've got strong hands. Not like Dave Fortnite. He's got weak hands.